Hi everyone, I'm back to read the next chapter, chapter 3, called Trapped by Fire. And this is in the last book, Changes for Kaya, A Story of Courage, Book 6. Trapped by Fire. The twisted gulch they rode down was narrow and steep-sided. Kaya rode as fast and as close to Tota as she could, keeping steps high right behind her. The foal ran too, his head at his mother's flank. Across the gulch, small fires flapped along the ridge where two winds met, pushing the fire back and forth between them. That side, the north one, was thickly wooded with juniper and fir trees. Kaya knew fire would burn fiercely in the dense trees. The south side, where they rode, was covered with bunch grass and a few pines scattered here and there. Fire would burn more lightly on this side, though in the baking sun the air felt like fire. Her eyes stung and her throat burned with every breath. In a gust of wind, the wavering fire across from them dipped down into the pines. Swiftly it grew and grew. Kaya watched in alarm as burning pine cones began to swirl through the air, starting spot fires farther down the slope. The smoke blackened and boiled upward. Fire began to growl like a bear as it spread both up and down the slope. Could it keep pace with them as they galloped their horses down the gulch toward the open end and safety on the plain beyond? The frantic horses couldn't be held back. Every fiber of their beings wanted escape. Other creatures also sought escape from the windswept fire. Frightened deer, their brown eyes wide, leaped out of the thickets and bounded to the south side of the gulch, racing up toward the ridge. Jackrabbits too came, and ground squirrels. Clouds of grasshoppers whirled up out of the smoke. Patches of brush under the trees burst into flame, flushing grouse and quail. When Kaya looked back, she saw Raven lying low on his horse, one hand cupped over his nose and mouth. Kaya thought only, "Stay with Tota, take care of Steps High and her foal." Fearfully, she looked across the gulch again. Heat waves heated and buckled above the spreading fire. Fiery pine needles rose up like sparks flying. Burning twigs snapped and cracked. Juniper trees began exploding in the intense heat. But the open end of the gulch wasn't far off now, was it? Kaya coughed and her eyes teared in the bitter smoke. It was almost too hot now to breathe, and fear was another fire in her chest. It was all she could do to cling to her horse as it bolted behind Tota's along the narrow mountain goat trail. Then, with a roar, the ground fire on the north slope suddenly exploded into the treetops. Kaya saw the topmost branches become a crimson tint of flames. The trees burned from the tops down like torches. A high wind gusted up from the burning trees, making the boiling fires hotter still. Wind snapped off branches with a sound like bones cracking. It lifted logs into the air. The fire swirl spun down to the bottom of the gulch and burst across onto the south slope below them. With a stab of pure terror, Kaya realized that now it burned ahead of them too, blankets of black smoke covering their escape route. The panicked horses doubled back, bumping into each other, rearing and snorting in terror. Kaya fought to stay on her plunging horse. Steps High reared again and again. Would she fall backward on the slipping stones? Would the foal be trampled? Terrified, Kaya thought, "Have I found my horse only to lose her to fire?" Tota scanned the steep-sided gulch, looking for a possible escape route over the ridge above them. But rim rock created a barrier just below the top. Could they find a way through the barrier? Kaya saw there was no choice. They had to try. "Stay with me," Tota shouted over the howling roar. "Don't fall back." His face was black with smoke and fierce with determination. Did he see a way out of this fiery trap? He gestured for Kaya and Raven to follow as he turned Runner toward the steep slope above them and urged him upward. Raven's horse clambered up behind. Its powerful haunches nodded with effort. Kaya forced the chestnut to follow and yanked on Step's high rope to bring her along. The foal sprang over the rocks like a deer. But could the horse climb faster than the fire? Racing for their lives, they struggled upward. Ashes like flakes of snow swirled across Kaya's sight. Burning embers fell onto her head and shoulders, stinging her hands when she brushed them away. On the loose stones, the horse's hooves slipped backwards with each lunge until they gained a broad shelf not far below the rim rock barrier. Then the wind suddenly split the smoke, and for a moment, Kaya saw the barrier clearly. Was that slash a crevice, a way through? Could they reach it? Again, Tota signaled for them to follow. Raven urged his horse after Tota as the curtain of smoke swung close behind them. Before Kaya could follow, Steps High began to rear, whipping her head back and forth frantically. Kaya looked back. The foal wasn't there. Was it lost in the smoke? Caught by the rushing fire? Frantic to find her foal, Steps High thrashed her head, tearing the rawhide rope from Kaya's grip. "Stop," Kaya screamed. "Don't go back." But searching for her foal, Steps High had already plunged down the slope and vanished into the smoke. Kaya tried to rein in the chestnut, turn it back after Steps High, but the panicked horse resisted. Without thinking twice, Kaya slipped off the chestnut, which pushed up on the slope where Tota and Raven had disappeared. Kaya whirled around. Smoke surrounded her on all sides, and through the smoke, the sun was blood red. She stood alone, her eyes blistered by the heat, and she cupped her hands over them. "I must be strong," she thought. "I must not give up." When Kaya opened her eyes, Steps High was lunging out of the blackness, her foal again at her side. She'd reclaimed her young one. As Steps High came near, Kaya leaped to catch the rawhide rope still encircling her neck. And with the horse pulling her, Kaya stumbled alongside as they started uphill again. Jagged stones tore at her feet. Her ankle twisted and she lost her footing. She fell uphill onto her stomach beneath the horse's legs. Kaya rolled onto her side. Would the hooves crush her? But Steps High curled her forelegs and managed to bring her sharp hooves down beyond Kaya's head. "Katsi yow yow," Kaya cried, but she knew that on foot she couldn't keep up with her horse. Steps High would have to let Kaya ride if they were both to escape the fire. When Steps High turned uphill again, Kaya saw her one chance to mount. If her horse threw her off, there would be no second try. Using all her remaining strength, Kaya scrambled onto a boulder, clasped Steps High's mane with both hands, and dragged herself onto her horse's back. Steps High shuddered but accepted Kaya's weight. Her horse hadn't forgotten. Kaya rejoiced to be one again with Steps High. But which way should they go? She had no idea. The blowing smoke created a vast black cave with no opening. She'd seen a crevice in the barrier, but where was it? There or there? Which way might offer escape? If they went the wrong way, the fire would seize them. Then Kaya heard a shrill whistle, one high, wavering note that cut through the roar. Could it be Greenwood singing in the flames? The whistle came again, more urgently. "Here, here," the whistle sang. It came to her that Tota, was whistling to her, signaling the way. She looked toward the sound but could see nothing. Then a gust of wind knifed through the smoke, and again she spotted the crevice with a deep game trail leading toward it. Kaya turned steps high along the game trail toward the opening. With the foal pressing after, they gained the base of the barrier. Now Kaya felt wind pouring through the opening. Steps High felt the wind too and nosed forward through the bulk to the narrow passage. Go, Kaya urged her horse. Steps High moved one step, then another. Kaya's knees scraped the sides as they slipped through, the foal following. And on the far side, Kaya saw the ridgeline right above them. She clasped Steps High even more tightly with her knees and pressed her face into the black mane. A little farther, we're almost there, she cried. A few more steps and they had reached the crest. Still panicked, Steps High started to tear down the other side, stones showering out from under her feet. Tota, on lathered runner, was riding hard back up the hill, looking for Kaya, just as Steps High had searched for her foal. He swerved runner, grasped the rope around Steps High's neck, and brought her to a standstill before she could injure herself and Kaya. Steps High's chest heaved, and her coat was drenched with lather. The foal's legs shook with fatigue. Kaya slumped forward. Her breath rasped in her throat, and her lungs ached from the smoke. Tota threw his arms around her shoulders. Rest a moment, he said. We're safe here. Kaya gazed around. The fire didn't threaten them here because an earlier one had already burned off the hillside. Ash-gray patches of sage still smoldered. Juniper stumps smoked. In some places, fire had swept by so quickly that it had left scrub brush, only singed. Farther down the stony hillside, Raven on his horse made his way to the narrow river below, where deer and elk stood chest high in the water. He glanced back and raised his hand to her. They'd made it to safety. You fell behind, Tota said in his deep voice. I thought I'd lost you. Steps High ran away from me to find her foal, Kaya gasped. When I caught her again, I lost my way. But you whistled for me. I followed your whistle and found the opening. Katsi yao yao, Tota. Her voice shook, and she thought she was laughing until she felt tears running down her cheeks. Tota wiped away her tears with his palm. I'm so proud of your courage, daughter, he said. You saved yourself and your horse too. But what was that whistle you heard? Your whistle, Kaya repeated. Gazing into her eyes, Tota slowly shook his head. I was headed for the river when I realized you weren't behind me. Right away I started back after you, but I didn't whistle to you. That must have been the stick people. They showed you the way. The stick people? Kaya asked. Ahe, Tota said. I think they saw you needed help, and they gave it. Kaya's head was spinning, but she remembered she must leave a gift for the stick people. What can I give them? She asked Tota. We'll leave them many gifts, Tota said. Now let's get to the river. The horses need water, and we do too. Still clasping Steps High's rope, he began to lead Kaya on her horse down the burned-over hillside, puffs of ash rising at their feet. And that is the end of chapter 3. And next time we will read chapter 4 called Gifts.